Good evening. I'm Dr. Carol Probsfield, President of the State College of Florida, and I welcome our studio guests and our METV viewing audience to this community conversation. We're gathered in the SCF Howard Studio Theater on the set of The Grove, a play currently being performed by our SCF theater students. We'd like to thank our forum partner, the Bradenton Herald, and our broadcast partner, METV, as well as our panelists from the Manatee County School District for joining us for this important conversation. College campuses are traditionally the place where thoughtful, lively, and civil discussions on timely topics are held, and we are proud to provide the forum for this evening's conversation. Now, I introduce you to Mr. Chris Willey, my co-host and editor at the Bradenton Herald, to share some introductory comments and to introduce our panelists. Chris?
Thank you, Dr. Probsfeld. Our guests tonight are Deputy Superintendent for Operations Don Hall, to my immediate right, School Board Chair Julia Ranabar, Superintendent Rick Mills, and Deputy Superintendent of Instruction Diane Green. Thanks to all for attending tonight. We appreciate your coming here to answer some questions from the public and from us. We thank the audience, too, for attending. We want to remind you that we will only be asking questions that were submitted via email, and we will not be taking questions from the audience. But we're going to start with some overview questions on the panelists, and then we'll discuss readers' questions too. Now let's begin.
So I have the first question. Superintendent Mills, your first year is now complete. What are the highlights and the lowlights, and what are you focused on for the future?
Well, great question. It's been a very interesting first year, to say the least, but a very exciting opportunity to come here to Manatee County and move our school district forward into greatness and restore what we had here in the past in a great school district. And so I just finished up my 13th month, basically, on the job, and have spent most of my time in that first year rebuilding the foundation for a great school district. You may have had the opportunity to go on and online and read the document I presented to the board for my evaluation. This has really been a year of rebuilding that foundation kind of from the ground up. We spent the first several months doing an assessment and evaluation of the school district and the state of it, and then of course, how do we move forward around that? I've been sharing with the principals for the last several months a book I read several years ago, Good to Great by Jim Collins. And it's basically the approach that we're applying to build a great school district. And first and foremost, what we had to do is, as a collective group, reconnect with the community, reconnect with our employees, get out and listen and learn and share. And so my 100-day entry plan was very much around accomplishing that, which allowed me to get out to all 53 of our schools and some of our charter schools in the first 100 days for that listening and learning component of that, as well as an assessment opportunity, and to hear from our employees and the community members what they saw the challenges, what their concerns were, so I could then translate that into the first year plan. After accomplishing that, and during that time, I spent a lot of time evaluating the staff and the organizational structure. I went out and recruited 2 level 5 leaders, and Dr. Green and Don Hall, to help me move the district forward initially. And then we started to reorganize the district in a structure that supported our ability to meet all our core functions across the school district in all those functions that we need to be successful in. And so we reorganized the district. We moved some people around, as Colin says, putting the people in the right seat on the bus. We moved some people around and put them where their skills were best suited. And then we went out and recruited a very high-performing team, of which I would comfortably say in any audience, we went out and recruited a level 5 leadership team, as Colin says in his book. Once we accomplished that during that time, it was then the what versus before, the who before the what. And that was part of the reshuffling that we did of people and getting people in the right positions to meet that organizational structure. We had a very supportive board around making those changes that we needed to make around the organization and putting the people in the right positions. And then last June, I met with over 200 of our leaders in the district, our principals, our directors, and laid out for them what the vision was for the school district, both near-term and long-term. And that was along the lines of Colin's book, what do we need to do and stay focused on, and what do we do best in delivering a quality education program. And so Collins refers that to the hedgehog concept. And so we need to get back as a school district to focus on what our passion is, what do we need to be doing, what do we need to be focused on, get out of doing things that we need to put on our stop doing list and stay very focused on that. And so we've done that, but in the process of all that, you have to identify the brutal facts of the organization, put it on the table, have a good productive discussion around that, and match that up with instilling an unwavering faith in the organization that we will be successful and we will take these challenges on, we'll correct them, and we'll move forward. So this first entire year has been about rebuilding that foundation around that approach and model. We've been very successful in doing. Obviously, we have high-quality Level 5 leaders in our organization. I think every time you come to a board meeting, you see that in presentations and the confidence being instilled in their abilities to provide the leadership. We have put in an academic plan that I'm sure we'll get to at this point and talk about near-term, long-term. We're going to present next month to the board our new district strategic plan that has an alignment of key performance indicators for all 7 goals, so that we'll be able to monitor our performance around those key KPIs, as they're called, to make sure that we're executing and implementing it to fidelity and getting the outcomes and results. So basically, the short answer is we had to rebuild the district the first year, and that's what the focus has been. Diane and her team's been great in putting the academic component in place. I'm very confident about where we'll see our academic performance be for this year and outlying years. And so we're kind of bringing it all together and putting into piece to put us onto that path of greatness.
And for the next year?
So our focus next year from an academic perspective, and I'll let Diana talk more about the component she's implementing for a broad perspective for the school district. Our goal this year was to come out of this budget year but balancing our budget, which we hadn't been able to do the previous 2 years, and we're on track to do that, to restore our fund balance, which right now we're reporting a surplus of $8 million towards our general fund balance at the end of the year, to take the $18 to $20 million turnaround that we put in place and had success around and see how do we reinvest that back into the district in this budget year, and how does that align to our priorities coming out of our district strategic plan. So our plan will be done in May, and then we'll take that plan once the board approves it and we'll align it to our budget for next year so that every dollar that we have in our budget is committed to that district strategic plan. And again, we get out of the business of doing things outside of our plan. So we're moving in the direction of alignment of our budget to a district strategic plan. We're going to implement performance management structures in place to monitor our execution of the plan quarterly and have performance management sessions about twice a month at every level of the organization to monitor that execution and the performance around those goals and metrics. We're also going to implement to fidelity in our schools our professional learning communities. That's been a concept around in education for some time. It actually came out of Lincolnshire High School out of North Chicago. And so we're going to put data teams over the summer. We're going to train and certify data teams in all our high schools so that every one of our high schools on the same playing field and looking at the data and the metrics and have the ability to manipulate and manage it and present it to our school leadership team so decisions can be made in terms of modifying or changing any instruction that we need to do. And then we're going to implement instructional leadership teams in every one of our schools that will meet regularly and look at data and metrics and assessments and make changes to instruction across the curriculum. And then we'll get down to the level of fidelity of teacher collaboration teams that meet by grade level and content area and have similar conversations around looking at metrics and data and assessments at a more level of the teacher and student level. So we're very excited about that because that capacity right there will enhance our ability as a school district to leverage the great leadership of our teachers in the classrooms on these leadership teams and use their skills and experience, develop their leadership skills in terms of their capacity to lead and to move on to leadership roles. So it's kind of a succession planning opportunity for building a deep bench of leaders who are ready to step up in the assistant principal and principal role, as well as be at the table making decisions around data and metrics and influencing the outcome on instruction. So we have a very exciting year coming up, and I'm sure we'll hear more of it from the rest of my team here.
Well, thank you. I think you touched on about 7 or 8 of the different items we have on our list. I'd like to move for a second to Chair Anabar. How would you describe your term as school board chair after your first 6 months? And moving forward, what do you hope to accomplish in the remainder of your term?
This board, the school board hires 3 entities, a superintendent, the audit function, and legal function. And this board has had to do all 3 of those in about a 1-year turnaround. So all that now is in place, and we review the data. We've had lots of workshops on everything and getting everyone up to speed on things. We still, even as recently as our last meeting, uncovered something, and it was immediately brought to a workshop and recorded, and as we find things, we deal with them and we move on. So the next piece of this would be doing what most of our findings were, and that is our board policies are pretty well outdated. For some, it's been about 10 years. So that will be the next thing that we'll be hiring a company to come in and help us with, and then we start systematically going through the departments. And for some of the key areas for finance and the board work, it finally sets into play some boundaries and roles and a system of checking on things to ensure that we never go to where we ended up.
Thank you.
A follow-up question for you. There has been concern in the community of late about school board and the way that they interact. And some in the public feel that there's some dysfunction there. What are your thoughts not only on that, but moving forward? Is the board working better now? Are things improving? And do you expect them to improve more, or just your whole thoughts on the board's interactions with one another?
Well, some of the board members have changed, and one of the things that happened in this community, and it's also a reflection on the board, there were long-standing relationships with the prior superintendent. And when that fractured, and you're still feeling that reverberation through the community, it also happened through the board. The board members trusted that the information that they received was accurate and correct, and they made decisions. And those decisions binded this district and this community. That has been very difficult for some board members to deal with, reading the Auditor General's report and looking through. And that, I think, is what you probably see. And whenever we come to a crossroads where we have to go to a new place, where we're now dealing with reports from Mr. Hall and Dr. Green, you almost want to go back to the other position and say, do I trust this? And, you know, Mr. Hall will say, how many times and how many times will we go over this before you realize that this is not the team of prior? I can tell you, and just recently in the last 2 weeks, I had a notice that I had to immediately sign an auto-signature for a document, and it had to do with a $20 million bond. We got I called Mr. Hall, we had a conversation, he had the bond counsel on the phone, he had the bank on the phone, briefed on the information. We had a document that the board had never reviewed. We couldn't find it in any of the minutes. And it was a sinking funds agreement, which laid out all of the terms of this bond. That immediately, we don't have a board policy manual. There was no way to trace where this document had ever been signed off by the board. So as chair, I sign all of the contracts and documents. Every chair does. That signature binds the district. But as chair, I don't want to sign any document that the board hasn't approved in a meeting. So that's where you go back. We had a workshop immediately. All board members were given all the same data. And after the workshop, all the questions were answered from bond counsel and from the bank, who came immediately in and went through it. We recorded it, and now we know. There's an awful weight on our shoulders right now, because some of those stipulations, when your bond rating stops, you could have one of those banks call the loan. You know, there are very serious implications to the amount of money we owe, not having a proper reserve, and that's what's starting to come out now. So our next workshop is going to be on all of our bonds, which will then tie in to the audit that was done on the sales tax, which was the major funding source for the bonds. So all of that is about to come in front of the board so that every board member is briefed and updated. It's very important.
Another question. Sorry. We received a lot of feedback and questions from our readers, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. May not be able to get to all of them, but we're going to try our best. Some questions were pretty lengthy, and we need to cut them down in order to get as many as we can. Our first batch of questions is from Kathy Mickle, and it concerns a bunch of financial matters. The payroll system has been targeted as a factor in the recent financial problems of the district. How current are the administrative computer systems now being used by the district? Are they up to date with local and state reporting requirements? Do the payroll, accounting, human resource systems talk to each other, pass information back and forth? And does it provide numbers for decision making with other systems, such as free reduced lunch, academic eligibility, et cetera? Who would like to address that?
Let me kind of do the broad stroke, and you can
Go
get into
for
the
it.
detailed questions. As I've mentioned already, one of our goals was to bring in a highly qualified, capable senior leadership team, and we went out and recruited a top-notch chief information officer in Mike Borshevitz. If you've had the opportunity to watch him in the recent board presentations on our IT, our vision, where we're going, what we need to do, you'll be thoroughly impressed once you get to know this gentleman and what his capabilities are. We recruited him from Northrop Grumman, was it?
Yes.
And he's phenomenal in what he brings to the table, and will take our district into the 21st century IT approach that we need to deliver for our students in our schools. So I'm very, very pleased that we've hired somebody to lead that effort within the district. Of course, Don has a very strong IT background, so we have a really dynamic team there to lead this district down that path to success. That said, in his assessment, I think he's used phrases like museum quality software, hardware. We have hardware that's so old in this school district, 8 to 10 years old, that we can't even upgrade it with software that's existing today. So we have some significant challenges there. Part of our assessment last year, and I've said this publicly in other venues, that our finances were not the only area that we were in significant trouble around. In IT and our HR component, we have some serious challenges around that we're addressing. But we're moving forward with that. We've got the right leadership in there to get us there around that. Very, very pleased that we're postured that way to do that. That said, I'll let Don answer the technical questions.
Well, I don't know if they're technical or not, but we'll try to get to what the questioner was asking. The systems, as you've already heard tonight, are systems that are not appropriate for a 21st century school district or any 21st century organization. It's very difficult to get good data in a timely manner from the systems that to help shape decision-making as an organization. And I'm a big believer in data-driven decision-making. And so when I look at whether it's the software package for payroll, HR, finance, budgeting, they're all tied together. It's called J.D. Edwards, and it has been around about 15 years in the district. And as most of you know, technology has changed quite a bit in the last few years. So that's a lifetime in technology terms. And so the ability for it to communicate with other systems, such as our student information system, is very limited, instead of them being seamlessly integrated so they can share information in real time. And so that provides challenges. In addition, to find people with the skill sets to manage it is very difficult. This is a very difficult environment to recruit and retain staff, qualified staff, period. But when you're working with systems that are antiquated, you're going to people who have modern skills, and you're saying, oh, by the way, we want you to jump back 15 years. And that's very difficult to do. And so I would say the systems are not appropriate for where we are, but more importantly, they're not appropriate for where we want to go. And so we are already looking at our options. We realize that in a situation where the district is at a revenue-constrained position, that you have to balance the ability to move forward as an operational unit and make sure that pieces work well together, while at the same time keeping the district solvent and in a healthy financial position, which we've worked really hard to do this year. And so I would say to that particular question and the reader, that is an area of distinct challenge for the district. It makes it difficult to make some of the operational and procedural changes that need to occur to increase efficiency, effectiveness, and communication, both internally and externally. And so as we try to balance those, we will continue looking at what can you do to modify, what do you have to replace, and what do you have to throw away so that we can get to that balance.
Chris,
Follow-up
I'd like to add that we just, and Don, you can jump in here. We just had a team from Oracle come in and do an assessment of all our systems across payroll, finance, budget, HR. And they did a briefing, an all-day briefing to the team, and they evaluated our systems and functions around 3 categories: marginal, was it stable, and best practices. And we're looking at an E1 ERP system to implement and acquire and implement in a district that will get us to a high-performing level as an organization around those functions. But in the assessment that was done, we were marginal in virtually every area. And our J.D. Edwards system was rated as stable in every area. So what come to the realization was that we're not even implementing the system that we have to full fidelity, and what the challenges were around that and why it wasn't implemented properly in the past. So we have some real challenges there, but if we move forward with the E1 system for our ERP, we will be at the very top of the line of performance around IT in our organization.
A little follow-up question. We got a little ahead of ourselves here and didn't give you two a chance to evaluate your first year. So, Mr. Hall, what were the big challenges that you faced?
Well, I would say, first off, I haven't been here a year yet. That's next month. That's next month. And I will say there have been some real highs and there have been some real lows. To be very candid with our audience tonight, having been in education for over 20 years and having worked in 6 school districts, this being my 6th, in this 6th state, having served on multiple national boards, having been a consultant in over 100 school districts, you get to see a lot in your career. And so when I came here, I came knowing that there was significant challenges ahead. When you actually immerse yourself in the environment, then reality sets in. And sometimes you find yourself scratching your head and asking 2 questions. 1, is this even possible? And 2, why in the world would you put yourself in that position? But I can answer the second question very easily. The first one I'm still working on. But the second question is the same thing that has driven me my entire career. I grew up as the eldest child in a single-parent family in rural eastern Kentucky. I have experienced personally poverty, and I do mean poverty, nights without going to bed with no food. So I know what poverty looks like and feels like, and it hits you at a deep emotional level. So for me, my education was my way out of that, out of generations of family that had been in that same situation. So as I worked through my educational experiences and then into my career in education, I said, for me, my mission, it's not my job, it's not even my career. My mission is that I'm going to be the voice for that child without a voice. And we have thousands of them in our school district. There's nobody standing up and rooting for them. There's nobody standing there hoping they succeed or showing them how they can succeed. And so I believe that even with the challenges I've encountered in my first year, that we are still doing good things for kids. And the better we make this district, the better we are able to communicate and collaborate, and the better we equip ourselves with the appropriate tools, we are going to provide a superior learning environment for all students. And that is my mission.
All right, Dr. Green.
And you want me
It's
to go
your
behind
turn.
him?
And just tell us a little bit about the challenges you've confronted in your first year, and what are you looking forward to as you look to the future?
Well, I would have to say ditto behind Don about the passion and why I'm here. First, I think it sometimes we overshadow. The one thing that I have been so appreciative of is the people who work in Manatee County Public Schools. They have been through so much, and we walked in, and at one moment I thought I was walking in and going to have my S on my chest, and I'm going to have my cape, and then as I walked through, I realized that I needed to take my cape off because they were wearing the capes. They have survived through this. And I would ask myself the same two questions as Mr. Hall. Why would we be here? And these individuals have persevered through the number of years of issues. And so for me, my challenge is, how do I find that balance in coming in to, as Mr. Mills says, recognize the brutal facts, but at the same time, be there for our employees as a sounding board and helping them move. We recognize, now let's move beyond. How are we going to get better? And I believe we have great people here. And the leadership team has truly been phenomenal. And to that point, research says that we actually only use about 10% of our brain. Well, I am here to say that Manatee County has definitely increased my brain power capacity, because we have had to go deep into the recesses of our brain matter to try to solve the issues that we are dealing with today. And the people here have taken on the challenge that they're going to go deep with me to figure out how will we solve the challenges of ESE? How are we solving the challenges of being ranked 40th in the state and getting us back to being in the top 10% of all the districts in Florida? So for me, the people have been just fantastic, and they are on board. They're ready for change. The low, if we had to talk about the low, is that it can sometimes be so overwhelming that I have the fear of, did I leave something behind? And I won't even know that I left it behind, because I'm dealing with so many different issues and trying to, not stay up late at night trying to figure out, okay, I gotta do this, I gotta do that. And, a parent called me today. Did I get back to them? Because they're the reason we're here. Their children are the reason we're here, and they should be paramount in everything that we do, in every decision. And so sometimes it can be a little overwhelming, and the fear is I've left somebody behind because I'm dealing with all these other issues.
Thank you. Could you address more specifically the Exceptional Student Education Challenge and what it is you're doing with regards to that?
Yes, to be brutally honest, ESE is probably our number one challenge. One, we are still dealing with a number of years of audit findings related to the IDEA B grant, which is under Exceptional Student Education. And we hired Wileen Herring-Cayasso, a longtime educator and who has been a director of ESE in 2 other school districts, and has worked in ESE her entire career and was very knowledgeable. And she and her team has come in and really set the tone in identifying our root cause issues, such as the audit findings. How are we going to fix those audit findings? And then start looking at program changes. How are we going to prepare our ESE students for the new Florida standards, moving them to more inclusive into the general education population, working with those students that have the potential of being identified as EBD, emotionally behavior disturbed. And as a district, we are ranked number 2 in over-identification of African American males in EBD. And part of the audit findings we're tied to, we are required to spend about $1.5 million of that IDEA B grant to fix that issue. And we currently are working on that process so that we can, within the next 2 years, have that audit finding removed from our school district. So once she started identifying our areas of extreme weakness, she started working with her team to put a plan in place. One of the areas that we will still struggle with until we are financially stable is her department is woefully understaffed. I come from a very similar sized district in the state of Florida, and for her today, she has only 12 ESE specialists. Those are individuals who work with our schools to ensure that the paperwork is correct, making sure student placements are correct, their individual education plan is being implemented correctly. We only have 12. I came from a district similar in size, much less of a budget, and that district had 25 individuals who took on that mammoth task. And so we have to start looking at, okay, these are the things we can change today and get our programs moving in the right direction. And these are the plans we need to build in our strategic plan over the next 5 years to ensure that we have the funding available to ensure that, one, that department is staffed appropriately, and then 2, making sure our schools have the correct staffing to serve our students. We have just identified that teacher certification is an issue. We have almost 100 teachers who do not have the correct certification to teach ESE students, and we have to get that turned around within the next 3 to 4 months. So we are working with our HR department on identifying those individuals. Now, once we have them identified, we're going to start working with how to help them get their certification so that we can be back in alignment with state and federal guidelines. Other issues are more school individualized, making sure that we have the right resources for our ESE students, ensuring that every school has the appropriate units to serve those students. One of the things we are implementing for next year is we are reducing the number of clusters of students that are been identified as EBD. In the past, those students were assigned to just a certain select few schools. So you may have a school serving 6 or 7 schools that may be a number of miles apart, but transportation was going across a whole section of a region to transport those students to that one school. So we are spreading those units out. 1, it reduced transportation costs. 2, it allows students to be in their home school with students that they know from their neighborhood or community. So that has been one step that we have taken, and we've received positive feedback from parents, knowing that, okay, my child will now not be on a bus for about 2 hours to get to their particular center. I could take the whole 90 minutes and talk about this particular topic.
Thank you. It does sound like a very comprehensive issue.
Yes. How deep is the school district in the budgeting process for the next school year? And what are their priorities? And how is the next budget shaping up as different from the previous budget?
Well, first and foremost, we came in obviously last spring, and we had a very short window, and we did a very abbreviated annual budget process over the summer. And I'll let Dawn talk about some of the things that we did differently in presenting our budget by line item down and encumbering our salaries and position control and everything that we put in place around that. But we also laid out for the board early in the fall our annual budget process for this upcoming fiscal year. And I'm very pleased that we're on target with our timelines around that. And again, I'll defer to Dawn to get more specifics around that. But we're right on track with all our milestones that we laid out to the board in the budget process. As I mentioned earlier, we want to publish our strategic plan next month and use that as the source document for our budget so we can have greater visibility and understanding of what the priorities are for our school district in the strategic plan, what we can fund and what we can't fund, and how do we look for alternative sources to pay for the priorities that we may come up short on funding for. And so I'm very excited about where we're at on that, and obviously we'll find ourselves over the summer meeting all the requirements in the presentation of the budgets and the hearings associated with that. So Dawn, you want to give your assessment on the process right now?
We had a couple things that we were trying to accomplish as we looked at the reforming the budget process. One was we wanted to do it in a manner that allowed for greater community input. We felt like that was critical to developing a budget that's meaningful and reflects the values of the community. Second, we tried to put together a process that allows the appropriate amount of time to get that input, to see what kinds of challenges we have to anticipate, and then try to align it to the strategic plan. So as we did that, we began working on this year's budget last September. And in that, one of the first things we did was put together a Citizens Budget Advisory Committee. And that committee was composed of people from the community. And their goal was to set up forums throughout our community for gaining public input into the budget and priorities. So as they worked throughout October and into November, we had 5 town hall forums spread throughout the county, being very intentional so that we could ensure we were getting the full community's voice. And we provided an overview of some of what was going on currently for them. We tried to answer some questions, but more importantly, what we did was we gave them the survey and we took their information. What did they feel? What did they think? In addition to that, we then put the survey online. So that was another way that the community could give their input about priorities for the strategic plan as well as for the budgeting process. We continued that through December. By the time we finished that, we had nearly 1,000 responses to the survey, and we felt like that was a significant increase in the previous budget processes. And it gave us good data to begin to look at, okay, how do we take this data, interpret it, so it becomes actionable? So we began in January working with the committee and getting their input, and then we brought together the strategic planning committee, and we have taken that information and it's been fed back into the budget we've used the goals from the strategic planning committee that and then fed that into the budget process. So as each department this year has been developing their budgets and the schools have been developing their budgets, we have tried to say, let's think about the big picture of where we're going. And so that has been the biggest change, I think, in our budgeting process, was increasing the community input as well as increasing the length of time to make it actionable and well thought out.
Chris, I'd like to add one other thing. One of the things that we identified last year in the spring in looking at the core functions of the school district and the organizational structure, we did not have a director of budget in the school district, and yet we have close to a $600 million budget. So we moved forward with identifying that shortfall and opening a position as a director of budget and going out and recruiting a very talented person who's in that position now, leading this budget effort. So we're very pleased around where we're at on it. We're pleased that we've addressed the shortfalls that have led to the challenge of the district of the past and hiring a director of budget that's leading this.
I have a follow-up for you, Ms. Renebar. As from the board's perspective, What are your thoughts on the new budgeting process, the public input, and the fact that the district just hired a budget director?
The board itself is actually working on their own board budget. In the past, it got submitted by staff. When I'm not too sure who did it. Someone said Lynn Lego did it. Someone said it got submitted by the superintendent's office. But we're actually having to go through. So for the first time, our board is actually reviewing as I get legal invoices. The legal invoices for the board are ranging anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 a month. And every one of them has a line item and something that's happening. That's something that all the board now has and that they look at. Same thing is for audit function that they have to go through and look. And there are also several other things that happen for the board. The board's first budget meeting will be in May. I think we're booked for May 6th. May 6th. So that will be our first look at it. One of the difficult things is if you try to pull invoices, what did we spend on this category for last year? That's where you begin to find out that money that in May was in this category in June got moved. And I don't know, however, whoever is watching, but there's lots of different accounting systems, and I'm familiar with a couple of them, one of which is Peachtree. And once you close out your month, you can't go back in and do certain journal entries. Because of the function that we had, the system that we had, that's exactly what was going on. People were going in and putting in journal entries, and then they were directed to move money to other areas. So you can't go back and pull old invoices and say, what did this cost us last year? What did that cost us last year? So we had to sort of guesstimate on some of this. And that's been a difficult process too, because we have 4 months left of the year, and where the board budget's now out of legal dollars. So we have to go back and sit down and say, how can we get through the next 4 months? So that's the process for us that will be different. And also, I think clearly defining when you hire an employee, it isn't just that person, and they can't possibly be moving around from different categories. They get hired, the money that's there for the benefits, the pension, the health care, it's all encumbered. We can't continue to say, well, we have a $15 million deficit in health care. That's not, according to state statutes, we're not allowed to do that. And then the state will say, how did you do that? Why didn't you pay attention? We have audit findings that go back many years for that. It's just not allowed. So that's the sort of thing I think that is different now, that as things come in, all of the whole portion of that cost is now looked at.
I think the other thing is we've worked really hard to change the reporting for the board. Because if the board is going to be charged with making decisions that impact the entire school district and to represent the community, they've got to have the right information. So we've put in place a forecasting process. And with this forecasting process, what it was designed to do is show, based on where we started the year, what kinds of expenditures have come in, based on changes in revenue projections, all of those kinds of things, where do we expect to end the year? And that's been pretty stable for the past 3 months because we have been able to monitor the expenditures, we're monitoring the revenue, and we're constantly looking at, if this changes, what else has to change in order to offset that? It's sort of like in your home budget, if you decide you're going to buy that gorgeous pair of shoes you wanted, well, that may mean you have to reduce your eating out for that month. And that's what we're building as a culture of exchanges within the district that says we can't just go and spend because we want something. We have to have it in the budget. And that is a fundamental change that is occurring. And I think that will serve the district very well moving forward.
I'd like to add that all three of us were utterly amazed at how spending occurred in this district. I mean, virtually everybody that could write a check out against our general funds in the school district could have in the past, which is why we got in a position that we were. We had no systems in place, no discipline. Literally, schools could write checks out of our general funds, and we would never even know it until we got the invoices. So we had to put a whole bunch of systems and structures in place around that. This year, we allocated budgets for sub-pay, non-contract instructional, overtime, where that was set in the school's budget, and they had to operate within that versus years of past where they could just get 12 substitutes for one day and bill the district, and we would have no visibility on that. Also, I'd like to add for the community that we're working very hard with the state and the federal government around these questionable findings for the audits. It's well known that we're looking at $10 million plus of possible fines. We're working very diligently around that, but the end state that, as the superintendent and the board, we'd like to accomplish is to keep that separate somehow from accomplishing the goal that we set last summer, and that was to bring in a balanced budget and meet our general fund balance of $10.3 million. And what Dawn has talked about in bringing to the board, every month the board gets an update on what's our projected surplus for our general funds, and that's been pretty steady right now at $8 million plus. And we're working very hard to even expand on that to get to the $10.3 million. If we achieve that goal and we can separate any penalties out from the audit findings, it will be the first time that this school district has balanced its budget in 3 years and come in with a fund balance in 5.
Can I just add a follow-up? I think the superintendent, to his credit, when we were in Tallahassee, we learned that Manatee County is the only district in the state of Florida that had a negative fund balance more than 1 year. So just put that into perspective. That has never happened in the state of Florida. So when they looked at maybe looking at some of the laws and how do you protect other districts, the lawmaker said, why would we have to do that when no one else has ever done that before? And why would you do that?
I'd like to dig a little bit deeper, if we might, into the recent internal audit that identified 3 areas of financial risk: human resources, information systems, and financial and budgeting. Of those, what is the most pressing that needs the most immediate response, and what is that response that you're working on?
Well, I'd say that, first of all, it's not anything that we didn't know earlier. Last spring, we pretty much identified that across all the core functions of the district, we were at risk in all areas. And so we've been working very hard since last summer to correct much of this and get us in the right direction. We still have major concerns in those areas. I'll allow Dawn to get into specifics around it. But the most important thing I'd like to highlight for the audience is that we've gone out and recruited very talented people to get us on track in those areas. And I'm very, very confident about the senior leadership team that we have in place that will lead us down that path to success. But again, those are findings that were recently presented by Shin & Company. And Dawn, do you want to elaborate more?
Sure. Well, when you say which of those are most problematic or to that effect, they're all. Mm-hmm. It's that simple. Every one of those areas that you talk about has a significant impact on the ability of the school district to perform its core function of delivering quality instruction to students. But even when you're looking at those, if you do not have a solid financial foundation with appropriate checks and balances, appropriate accountability, appropriate mechanisms to hold people accountable when they go outside of the expectation for managing budgets, and using other sources to ensure that you're using the best fiscal practices you can, then everything else won't matter because you can't afford to do it. For example, one of the things we put in place this year is something called encumbrance, budget encumbrance. And it was not a practice used in the district. And so when you say, how much are you going to have at the end of the year? Well, it was very difficult to forecast that because nothing had been encumbered. So what does that mean? When you encumber your money, you're saying, this much of our budget is already spoken for. And the biggest portion of our budget is personnel, as it is in almost every organization. So this year we encumbered or put a hold on money related to personnel and salaries and wages and fringe. So when you do that, you've already off the top ensured that you've taken care of your largest cost, and you know how much that's going to cost you. Makes it a lot easier to say, okay, what's left? Then we went in and we looked at our charter process. There are costs associated with that. So we've been encumbering that. And the last one we encumbered was our utilities. So and amazingly, when you add up those areas, and we recently did this for the board and showed them on a chart how it ranked, you're looking at over 90% of the budget is now already known how much will be spent by the end of the year. So that leaves you less than 10% that you have to say, okay, where are we, you know? And even without the historical data that we've talked about, it allows you to narrow down that focus you have to have. And so that's what has allowed the forecasting to go much better. But that's just a basic good fiscal practice. And so we're trying to look at other good fiscal practices. But we're also looking at all operational areas, including HR. Next year, that's going to be a heavy focus for us because we think we have the budgeting part. A lot of that is in control. Is it perfect? No, by far not. But we feel like we have a good handle on it. But we know the next thing you've got to do is look at your human capital because that's where your largest cost is. So if you can't manage those costs, that has a direct impact on the fiscal situation. So that's sort of where we're going from an operational standpoint, because we know that, again, operations' only purpose is to support the delivery of quality instruction.
I just want to say this team is not always very good about saying what they do exceedingly well. And another thing that happened that was unique for Manatee County, given all the circumstances we had, the superintendent gave a directive that the staff who had been through so much needed to be a high priority. The Manatee County teachers and the AFSCME unions were negotiated first in the state of Florida. They had raises assigned to them, and that was established right off the bat. Sometimes I think the good news goes by in a blip, and we see repeats, and I've never seen a repeat of that news. But we didn't balance the budget this year by cutting teacher pay, and that's what was happening in this district. And that, to me, is a significant change because this superintendent said, our teachers are important, our staff is important, and AFSCME wasn't treated any different than the teachers. And when you say that our capital, our biggest dollars are our staff, we actually made sure that they were taken care of first. And I think that's important to make sure that we give them thanks for that.
The school district has filed a formal complaint with the state seeking an investigation of the finances under former Superintendent Tim McGonigal. The district's own financial audit did not show any criminal activity. Has the state responded to that request yet? And what's the goal and the end game with the state investigation?
I've been in contact with Mr. Blackburn, Inspector General of the state. I had a recent conversation with them. They've reviewed the complaint that we forwarded to the state upon their request asking for that. And we work very closely with our team and our internal auditors to evaluate that and put that in writing. They have asked us for a list of our team members to interview, and that was recently forwarded to them. And I expect at this point they're arranging opportunities to have those interviews. Everything right now is preliminary, and a decision has not been yet, from my understanding in talking to Mr. Blackburn, or whether they will initiate a formal investigation at this point.
What would be the end game of an investigation? What would you hope to accomplish with that?
Well, when I first came here in my 100-day entry plan and got out to all the schools and talked to all the staff and faculties at every one of our schools, talked to all our departments, and I will tell you it was exhausting but very rewarding to get out there and be able to do that. The one common theme that came out of all of this is how did we get where we're at and why isn't somebody responsible? And so I understand and I obviously read the forensic audit that was done, but it's also my understanding that the forensic audit was very much focused on anything criminal of nature. And so working with the budget over the summer and talking to some of the staff, things kind of surfaced up that kind of raised some concerns about how budget process was done in the past, how money was moved around, et cetera. And so when we finally went to Tallahassee and listened to the Joint Oversight Committee's response to the Auditor General's presentation and using phrases like we're a poster charge for financial failure as a school district and this is radioactive, it really kind of brought to home that in order for us to move forward as a school district, I think we should answer the fair question that's been asked of me everywhere I go and make an effort to raise some level of closure to that so we can move forward and restore trust here. I mean, obviously, we've been operating in an environment of total lack of trust of our school district, and rightfully so. It's my goal as superintendent to restore that based upon what I've heard and experienced, bringing closure to it in some kind of a formal investigation outside the boundaries of a criminal nature would be, I think, a good step in the process of that healing process for the community and start reinitiating trust back in our district. We have been totally transparent, honest, and candid with our board, with the community about everything that we uncover. We share it immediately. We do have to do some analysis around it, et cetera, in order to presentation, but we're always going to be straight up with the community and our board on the challenges that we face. I know this, I've told the staff this over and over and again, you know, bad news doesn't get better with time, and if you want to restore trust, you got to be able to tell people the brutal facts. And that's why we were so diligent early on in getting the brutal facts out there, because people really need to know the challenges of the school district and what we have faced and are still facing, and we still find stuff every week that should have never been allowed to happen. There was a lack of supervision, a lack of accountability, a lack of systems, but it's getting less and less.
Mr. Redenbaugh, your thoughts?
Well, one of the things, I get asked the same questions in different formats. In order for there to be criminal charges, somebody would have to have taken money and put it in another bank account. And that isn't what happened. What happened was money was not properly allocated within the district, and money was spent on things that were not allowed by state statute. So things were put into accounts. It is legal to move certain funds to certain accounts. You have 13 months to put that back. But clearly you had no intention of putting it back if it never existed, and that's sort of what was going on. It took on a whole new dimension when you started withholding salary money or money from actual employees for health care, and you're running a health care deficit. Employees are saying, well, how much of that was our money? We never really got clarity on those numbers. So then the other option is, well, you know, you should get a lawyer and you should, you know, do civil, you know, file a civil complaint. Well, anyone can do that. But then you're asking this board to take even more money out of classrooms and education, and you're asking us to go to court with the roll of the dice, and I can clearly tell you on the other side what will be said is that there was no action by the superintendent that the board didn't approve. And at the end of the day, the board was responsible to make sure that all of those facts that they were presented were true, and when it came to the finances, the former superintendent was chair of the audit committee, and the contracts that went out for auditing services were clearly defined that the only thing that those companies saw were what the superintendent prepared and gave to them. And all of that went by the board. And there was a level of trust. When you talk about trust in this community, every board member trusted that what they were given and the decisions that they made right up until the end of the resignation of that superintendent, that they were fine, that the accounting was fine. And it wasn't. It could never have been. The amounts were just way too out of order. And the year that we actually crashed was the year that we had an infusion of about $14 million extra. That's how bad it was. So that's how you knew that the indicator was clearly going up to be 30 or more million.
I've got another reader question here, and this is from a current employee who requested anonymity. And it's a little bit lengthy, but let me see if I can get through this. We've heard many times that one significant factor in the financial implosion of the district was when the Manatee Business World Ownership Committee decided to turn off position control. The question is why? Who made the suggestion? Who approved it? And why was it approved by the board? Was it part of a cover-up in order to allow more funds to be shifted around? Are there people who were part of that decision still on the payroll? And how do they explain it? Position control was replaced with something called ePortal. It has been reported that the ePortal system was so flawed that there were basic errors with addition and subtraction. If this is true and errors in a program that the district purchased cost the district millions of dollars in misspent funds, wouldn't or shouldn't this be grounds for the district to sue the company that developed ePortal?
Want me to take it? Of course you want me to take that one.
That's part of the why I came here.
Yeah, that's part of the why. Well, there's a lot of different pieces in that question. Some of it, I will say, is a little misinformed. I will say that right off the bat. What is correct about it? There was a decision made by senior management from the previous administration to have that turned off. They were told, the finance team was told, turn it off. Because the process for allocating staff to the schools was if a building administrator came to the superintendent at that time and said, I need 3 more teachers. They were given 3 more teachers. But if position control was on, that would have flagged that as a cost you couldn't bear. So it was turned off to make it harder to understand how many staff members were there, how many staff members were budgeted for, and it became a very difficult thing to track without it. Now, the other thing we've already talked about is that the system itself is not designed to do a lot of what we need it to do. The system was initially a manufacturing accounting system. It was never designed for K-12 education. So there's certain functions in it that just aren't designed to help us get the decisions we want. The decision was made to turn it back on. That occurred this past year. What we found was it wasn't set up properly to begin with. So it really wouldn't have mattered to an extent if it was on or off. It wasn't going to work. The e-portal is a piece of the process of procurement or purchasing and getting from PO to product. However, it is not related to position control. It is a way that information gets from one part of the ERP system to another part of the ERP system. Again, because of the lack of coordination and integration in the system. So it was designed to be a bridge to try to get that information. E-portal is probably not going to be something that is a long-term solution because I don't believe it serves the function it was purchased for. Did it work or not? That's a question I really can't answer. What I can say is it would have been impossible to tell based on the way the data was managed to know whether it was functioning or not. So I think that's more of a fair response than saying it didn't work.
I'd like to add that back to the assessment that Oracle team did when they came in, we talked about many of those things to include position control. Again, that was an area that we were assessed as marginal in, and we had a system that would have made us stable. And so when we went through all these functions and we were marginal in everything and our system was stable and we're moving towards an E1 system that will get us to best practices category, I asked the question of the team, the Oracle team, why is it that we didn't implement the J.D. Edwards system to fidelity? You want to answer that one?
Be my guest.
Because we didn't do the training and the implementation properly, and as a result of not doing that, people were doing workarounds and wraparounds and customizing it around what fit instead of using the system fully to capacity.
Right, and I think that is the key right there. Many times when you start to implement a large-scale system, an enterprise system as they would say, when it reaches the entire organization, you do some customization relative to what kind of data you want. You do customization relative to how you want the reports to come out. What you do not do is change the core functionality of how the system works because you want it to work around your work processes. As soon as you do that, it doesn't matter what system it is, then it's not going to function the way it was designed to work. Then when you go further than that and say, oh, well, we want it to be able to do this, rather than figuring out how it could do that for them, unfortunately, district staff created solutions and bolted on, as I call it, to that solution. So they could get that functionality without ever really getting into the system to say, would it do that anyway? And again, that goes back to what I talked about earlier about skill sets and the inability for finding the right people at times, and very much around the training. The lack of training that went around a lot of the enterprise applications in this district has been a reason why those systems have not performed the way people expected. There was complaints last year about the student information system. So we relaunched that. How do we relaunch it? We went on it and trained everybody. We found a lot of the problems were user errors. They just didn't know how to do certain things. Are there technical issues? Yes. And that goes back to, once again, some of the staff that was on the team didn't raise the right flags because they put it on a database that it was never designed or tested to run on. So you could expect problems. So when you start looking at all these complex things that work together, it's usually an issue of over-customization, under-training, and lack of understanding of what you're trying to accomplish with the system.
Just a caveat to that. Your student information system is critical to a school district, and we had implemented Focus some time ago in the district. We did not do it properly, so we had to re-implement it, as Don had said. But in the discussions with the leadership of Focus, we found out that there was no executive sponsor signed, there was no project manager, there was no project management team, there was no expertise trained in the schools around it, there was no training program implemented. So as a result, it was poorly implemented, and when we got here and evaluated it, we were using it at best at 10 to 15% of capacity.
We've got another question from a reader, but let me preface it with a different question. The school district and teachers union have reached an agreement on a new teacher evaluation system, a system employed by hundreds of districts around the country. The legislature requires a performance pay schedule by 2014-15. What are the primary factors in this new system? And from the reader, what kind of pay raise can teachers expect this year?
Well, first, I'm going to talk about the teacher evaluation. We have agreed to move to a Charlotte Danielson model, and I brought the book. It's based on Enhancing Professional Practice, a Framework for Teaching. One of the reasons we chose Charlotte Danielson was twofold. The ease of use in training our administrators. It is easy to start that process, and the training is available across the country to bring to our district throughout the school year. So we've already put a timeline in place. At the end of this month, we will provide the first training to our administrators so that they can start processing the Charlotte Danielson model throughout the summer. As well as we will bring in someone from an organization that has worked with her work to come and just have a conversation with our teachers, showing them the research, how strong the research is, talk about the rubrics. One of the things that we have struggled with is developing those rubrics. Well, the Charlotte Danielson model already have those rubrics developed. So for the media specialists, those rubrics are in the book. For the school psychologists, the rubrics are in the book. We do not have to develop and open the door to question the validity, the reliability of the rubrics. So for that purpose, we are moving to Charlotte Danielson. The performance pay is a negotiable item with the association. So for me to sit here, I cannot say what could they expect for a raise, because that has to be negotiated, and we are starting that process of working with our association, of looking at our current teacher salary schedule and applying the rules of the law of moving to performance pay. One of the things that I'll let the community know is that teachers who are currently employed with the school district, they will have to make a choice. They can stay on the current teacher salary schedule. They will be considered grandfathered into that salary schedule, and will have to make a decision, do they want to move to the performance pay schedule? So by law, the performance pay schedule really only applies to new employees, and current teachers will have to make that decision. And right now, we believe it is a one-time decision. Once you choose to go to that schedule, there's no going back. So we will be spending the entire summer working through that process, because we must have something in place by July 1.
I'd like to add that this time last year, we were faced with being provided funding by the state for the teachers' pay increase. And a wonderful blessing that we had that money and supported that. But in order to do that, we had to come to terms with the contract around it with MEA. When I looked at our human resources capacity, we had no function capacity whatsoever in our human resources for labor relations and negotiations. So we had to go out, I had to go out and find somebody to represent us to do that. I used the services of Bill Vogel, former superintendent, and several years in HR and education. And he was able to represent us in coming together with that agreement that allowed us to be one of the first districts in the state to implement that pay raise for our teachers. And so that was our approach around that, and he continues to support and have discussions as we move forward with our timelines for the next contract.
Can I do one more?
Oh, yes, please.
One of the things that Mr. Vogel identified when he first came here, and obviously we've been hearing from our teachers, if you were hired as a new teacher during the last few years, your pay was cut. So you were now earning less than the first year teachers because they were coming in at a starting pay, and so we had this inequity. And I don't remember the exact total number of people that were affected by this, but that was another piece of this. It would have been easier to say, here's the percentage across the board, but an inequity had happened there. So a new formula was entered in so that the employees that had those pay cuts during this time that our budget went through that were restored at a greater percentage, and that also was supported by the union to make those people whole where they should have been. And I want to just say, I mean, there were so many pieces to those negotiations, and they went so smoothly to be the first in the state.
I would like to add another piece that will be a great challenge for us. The Charlotte Danielson model is for the principal observation side of the teacher evaluation, which is 50%. The other 50% is based on student growth. And if there are any teachers in the audience, they are very familiar with the value-added model, which is used by the state for only assessments that are state-driven. Well, we have thousands of teachers who do not teach subject areas that uses a state test. We are required to develop end-of-course exams for every course that is taught by a certified teacher. And so currently, you may have read, it may have been in the Tampa Tribune for another district, we have close to 800 assessments we have to create before the beginning of this next school year. We are working with other consortiums around the state, developing item banks, trying to vet those item banks. We have several of our schools who are piloting other district item banks so that we can be prepared for that portion of the performance pay plan. And I think that is a huge obstacle that many people don't recognize that the district will be faced with next year.
You mentioned that the district is rewriting a strategic plan or developing a new strategic plan. What are some of the primary goals? Can you share those with us that might be in that plan? And how does this plan differ significantly from the previous plan?
Well, it's kind of a question. When I came here and interviewed for the position, I'm sure Diane was asked the same question. What do you think of the current district strategic plan? I was very candid about how I felt about it. I didn't think it was functional, wasn't measurable, wasn't executable, and I didn't see anything in place that would monitor the execution of it and outcomes and performance of it. And that's exactly what a strategic plan is for. So again, we're in the process of writing this strategic plan. And so we went through, we did the survey that Don had mentioned with the community. We did a SWOT analysis around the district, looked at data. We brought in a very comprehensive package of items for consideration to look at what our priorities should be as a school district and how do those priorities align to our core functions that we need to be successful. And we came up and identified with 7 priorities based upon all that data, and we had 30 to 35 folks in the room that were part of the strategic planning committee that represented high school students, teachers, principals, community members, leaders in the community. Our senior staff were there, and we identified 7 priorities that translated into 7 goals across the core functions. It's our intent to have a very heavy academic focus, to our district strategic plan. Diane has been working since January with her team to deliver on that, but the core functions are across the district, from safety and security to operations to business to academics. And our goal is to have a plan that's executable, that's measurable, and to put a performance management system in place to monitor quarterly our performance on it and how well we're doing in the key performance indicators and the goals around that. So we're seeing growth and performance on it, and we can demonstrate to the board and to the community on a quarterly basis that the plan that we've all approved and gotten behind is functioning, it's being executed, and it's actually performing the results and outcomes that we're looking for.
I think one of the things I would add to that is that when you look at the 7 goals that were actually finally decided on, they mirror the community input in process. So it's not like we took the process, we took the surveys, we did all this work, and then the committee went off and did something else. So I think that's something that as a district and as a community we can be proud of, that not only did we share what we thought was important as a community, then the planning process reflects that set of priorities. And I think that's a very positive way to start to say we are working together. We are part of the community is part of us. And so I think that's one of the things that was very powerful in this strategic plan.
And as far as the academic plan portion of the strategic plan, I think it is an outstanding map to our destination of what we're here for, is to graduate students who are prepared for one of 3 things: to go into the workforce, the military, or post-secondary, whether that is college or a vocational school. And the academic plan is setting that pathway so that we don't allow ourselves to be bogged down in the minutia and forget why we're really here. And how is it different from the previous strategic plan is that it gave you no opportunity to see how well am I performing against this standard. It gave you no opportunity to see, well, is what I'm doing actually making a positive impact on student achievement. It gave you no opportunity to see how many of your students are really not on track to graduate on time. Today, we can go to any one of our high schools and we can have that conversation with our high school principals, and we can say, how many students are not on track to graduate on time? And they should be able to answer that for me. And then that opens now a conversation. What are we going to do about that? What are the strategies that we have available to us to ensure that we can do the very best job of trying to get those students on track to walk across that stage? It's the whole reason I'm here, is to stand on that stage and shake their hand and know that that plan is the beginning, and then it comes to life in our classrooms and in our schools with the people we have out there with our students.
I would like to add that approving and moving forward with the district strategic plan is only the front end of strategic alignment throughout the entire district. So after we have the strategic plan at the district level done and prepared and approved, then Diana's academic departments will write strategic plans at their level that support her academic plan. On the business ops side, Dawn's team will write business and operation plans that support the district plan as a whole and the academic component of it. Now you have alignment across the district at the district level, and our executive directors of our portfolio schools this summer will write a strategic plan that meets the needs of their portfolio of schools, but yet is aligned to Diana's academic plan. So then we'll have alignment among the 3 executive directors of portfolio of schools. Our ultimate destination around being strategically aligned is to have every school have a 5-year strategic plan that will be the source document for their annual school improvement plans. They'll already have a framework for that to identify their school improvement plans on these 5-year plans. These school 5-year plans will be aligned to the executive director plans, which are aligned to the district academic plan. Now we have complete alignment in the school district vertically and horizontally across the district, and being totally focused and aligned and going one direction together And all our resources, all our professional development will be aligned to those plans at every level. So we'll no longer be doing professional development that doesn't make any sense. It's not aligned to anything. We'll no longer be spending money on anything that's not in the plan. And we'll be able to do a stop doing list at every level that if it's not in the plan, we're not going to do it.
We have a little bit of time left, and I think we'll focus on reader questions now. Here's one from Chuck Palmer. Following the December 2012 mass shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, Manatee Glen's president, CEO Mary Ruiz wrote an op-ed column in the Bradenton Herald and, among other things, recommended a two-step plan of action for us locally. The first step was that elementary, middle, and high school students be screened for mental health problems. She wrote that treating youngsters with these early stage conditions can prevent the subsequent onset of serious mental disorders that are far more difficult to deal with. The second step was that members of the public, including teachers, students, and parents, take a 12-hour mental health first aid course so that they can become better equipped to recognize when acquaintances are undergoing significant mental health problems and learning how to get timely and effective help. What is the Manatee County School District doing along these lines and also with regard to preventing horrific tragedies similar to Newtown?
Shortly, I'll defer to you after I answer this from my perspective. That was something that we collectively recognized pretty quickly we needed to focus on. So I spent the better part of most of a day with Mary and her team getting a briefing on their facilities and services, visiting all their facilities, and it really was prominent that we were not fully utilizing the services available. And so Diane and I talked about it. I'll allow her to talk about it more, but we recognized that in our schools, we didn't feel that our principals fully understood the services that are available, the referral, the process around that. And so we one of our principal professional developments, we had the team come in and present, how do you recognize these, how do you use the services, how do you do the referral, so we could get better at taking advantage of that for our students in need of that. You want to add more?
Yes. Our Student Services Department, this is also under Ms. Cayasso. The supervisor is Patricia Bernhardt. Her staff wrote a grant for the portion of mental health screening, and they presented that training to myself. We then came before the school board and we gave a brief presentation on the training. It's called Typical or Troubled, and we are working through all of our schools, training all of our teachers. That is a mammoth undertaking because the training it takes time. It's about an hour and a half training, so we have to split it up during teacher faculty meetings and planning time to have all our staff trained. But one of the areas of weakness was, what is the framework? Just because I recognize something might not be going on, something might not be right with a particular student, do we have now the structure in which now we can ensure that there are checkpoints on how we help that student? And that is the area that we needed to enhance. So we are working with our partners, and we are developing, I don't want to say a pathway because that almost sounds like you're going, but we're developing a framework. So I identify a student. I believe it is not typical behavior. Part of who do I go to? Well, we are now training our guidance counselors. We're trying to ensure that all of our schools have guidance counselors who will have that training of typical or troubled, and then additional training on top of that. Part of our new staffing model that we shared with our school board just recently talked about putting in student support specialists. These will be certified individuals at every single school that they will be able to start, I don't want to say identifying, but students that have been identified, try to be more proactive. Those individuals can work with our social workers where we can go into the home and do home study, have more dialogue and conversation about what's happening. Is it something happening at home or issues at school? And then how do we put something in place to prevent that or have students be referred for services that need to be more in depth. The other piece of that are for our students that have already been identified, yet the services are being offered, but they are still on our campus. We are part of our Idea B grant. We are going to hire what we call behavior techs. These individuals will be able to somewhat monitor these students so that we can, if something is starting to escalate, we can start to intervene prior to full-blown escalation on a campus. So we believe that we are putting the pieces into place so that it's not for identifying students with mental health, it's identifying ways to ensure all of our students can be in an environment that's safe for them, it's conducive to learning, but yet if there are issues, we have a mechanism in place to address those issues.
This question is from Herald reader Susan Malucci. She asks why several of the public schools in Manatee County have chosen not to take advantage of the free civics education for students offered by lawyers and judges trained by the Florida Bar Justice Teaching and other civics programs. And then how does the school board and school administrators demonstrate their value of civics education?
I will address that. We offer civics education in 7th grade. It is a semester course. Prior to me arriving, they already had civic material at each campus. We will be reevaluating what we're doing for civics education because at the next year, students will have a requirement of an end-of-course exam for civics. In addition, what I would like to do, I have not been approached about those services being offered to Manatee County, but we have 2 opportunities where we can utilize that support in our civics classes at 7th grade, but also our seniors are required to take American government and economics, and those are other opportunities that we can utilize those services. Just to briefly share, once our students take civics in 7th grade, in 8th grade they take American history. When they reach to high school, their junior year, they're also required to take another American history course, and then their senior year they have American government and economics. But whoever offered the question, please have those individuals contact me and I will
Want to give them your number?
If I knew yours, I'd give it. But they can reach me at the main county office. That number is 941 area code 708-8770, extension 2220.
Thank you.
Here's a question from Dr. Craig Triguero. Currently, the School Board of Manatee County only offers early foreign language programs to students where English is a second language. When will the school board offer foreign language courses starting early in primary school?
Okay. Currently, Wakeland Elementary is our IB magnet, and that school offers foreign language. This current year, they are offering 2 languages, Spanish and Chinese. We offer foreign language through our IB track. Wakeland is the elementary. Johnson Middle School is our middle school IB, where we offer Spanish and Chinese. And all of our high schools offer, they're required, 2 years of a foreign language. I was just at Manatee High School, and we are working with them to start offering Latin. So we offer Spanish, Chinese, French, and if we are able to find a certified teacher, we will probably start offering Latin at Manatee High. But right now, it is through our IB track where we offer those foreign language at the early grade levels. It does go back to financial stability because you must hire a certified teacher to teach those courses. In addition, it's about a commitment to time. Currently, we are paid for 300 minutes a day of education, which equals about 1,500 minutes, and we're serving our students at 1,750. Where will we find the time in the day to add another course, especially at the elementary level, with the requirements that they have? It's just going to be challenging. But because we have the IB program at Wakeland Elementary, Johnson Middle, part of that program is the requirement of a foreign language. So we do offer that, and our schools are open to choice. So if a parent is interested in their child having a foreign language at a very early age, I would recommend that they apply to choice to Wakeland Elementary, where it is offered, and Johnson Middle, where we offer it. Now, I'm sorry, I'm misleading the public. All of our middle schools offer a foreign language. They all offer Spanish at the middle school, but Johnson offers Spanish and Chinese.
There's a question from reader W. Clay.
You don't have your microphone.
Oh, thank you. It's getting late. This is from reader W. Clay. If we are so much in debt, why are we still providing busing for choice schooling? If a student wants to go to a school out of his or her district, shouldn't the parent provide transportation?
Again, in my assessment early on last spring and summer, I got out and talked to many of the developers here building homes. We have several in the area, and the discussions around that. It's pretty evident to me at that time that we have significant challenges around school choice, transportation, our boundaries, increasing student populations, particularly east of the I-75 corridor. We're going to exceed our capacity as a school district in our current schools right now within the next few years east of that corridor, north-south, east of 75. The parish area is exploding in population, student population. Lakewood Ranch is. We need to get, as a school district, our hands around what are our challenges for the next 5 to 10 years around meeting the needs of increased growth population of students. How does that translate into changing our boundaries? How are we providing transportation for all of our schools around choice? This is all kind of a very complex issue that's all kind of synchronized together. So I've put together a task force, and we are going to outsource a third party to come in and do a comprehensive study of our county and our school district around our population growth areas, where we're over enrolled in schools, what are our projections around that, how does that translate into looking at our boundaries, and do we need to change it, how does it impact our transportation around choice. We have some real challenges, and we have to get our hands around it, and we've got to move forward with that. I just met with some parents recently about their concerns about where their home school is for their students. And so we're going to be able to roll out within the next year a comprehensive plan for the county and the district to address our challenges that are all those that I mentioned, and transportation, and how does that all tie into that. I looked at all the boundaries across the county, and we have pocket boundaries in other boundary areas, small pockets that support a school that are in another boundary area. And they're outdated boundaries per se around the reasons why that happened back in 2006 timeframe, and we need to address that. So we really need to look at capital outlay. How do we expand on existing campuses, the need to build new schools? We have some real challenges we have to deal with, but that's part of that that'll come out of that study.
Well, I'm afraid we're out of time. Our regrets for not getting to every reader question. Thank you, panelists, for coming tonight, and thank you, audience, for attending. And thanks for METV for being here to televise this. And thank you to Dr. Probsfeld and State College of Florida for hosting and providing such a great venue. Thank you.
Thank you for being a wonderful forum partner, and I'd like to thank everybody for joining this evening and invite you to come back. Check www.scf.edu to look at the numerous activities we have on campus, including this play that will be continuing for the next several days.